Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Jeff Winter back. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks for having me back. I'm excited for round two.
I know. It was an amazing discussion last time. We went through what is manufacturing 4.0 and laid it out as a framework. But since then, you also had a new job. I guess you switched. You went to another company.
Yes. I'm now the Vice President of Commercial Strategy with Belden.
That is terrific. Before we get going, would you please take maybe a minute to introduce yourself to our audience that may not have seen the previous podcast or have not watched you on YouTube and other places?
Sure. For my day job at Belden and even at my previous company on the last one, I lead the company's kind of business and commercial strategy, helping to guide the company to be going in the right direction for Industry 4.0. On the side, I'm known as one of the top thought leaders and influencers in the space of Industry 4.0, which is why most people know me as sharing stats, trends, opinions, and perspectives and best practices on all things Industry 4.0.
In our last discussion, we spent a lot of time on Industry 4.0, so we won't get into it. So if any of your audience is listening to this, I would highly request them to go back and find that episode. We'll also put a link in there. But let's go back to the framework that you talked about at length, which is Modernize, Optimize, Transform, as a part of our last previous discussion. In your experience, at what stage do you think most companies get stuck or fail or don't try hard enough to get to the next phase?
So I talk about this framework all the time, but I'm going to answer it a little differently because the Modernize, Optimize, Transform is not really a roadmap in the strict sense. It is better thought of as a way to classify types of initiatives. Yes, in principle, companies want to move towards transformation work because that's usually where the biggest strategic value sits. But transformation almost never happens as like one giant standalone project. It's usually the result of many modernization, many optimization, and many smaller transformation initiatives kind of stacked together over time. So in a real world, it's messy. A company might do 10 modernization projects, maybe 4 happen alongside optimization work and maybe 6 don't. Maybe a couple early transformation pilots get sprinkled in there. And that's much closer to how it actually works than some neat maturity staircase. So where do companies get stuck? Usually not in one stage, if you want to call it by itself. They usually get stuck in the gap between projects. They end up with a portfolio of disconnected initiatives. You have each project is justified on its own. Each team has its own KPI or own ROI case. Each initiative is managed as an isolated win, but nobody's managing the interdependencies across all of them. And no one's trying to tie them back to a larger business change that all these are supposed to enable. So that's where the momentum dies, I see most often. So for example, if a company wants true transformational initiative like autonomous, highly adaptive production scheduling across plants, it will require a whole bunch of things to happen. You have to modernize your core control systems. You have to standardize your master data. You have to clean up your process definitions. You have to improve your connectivity between OT and IT systems. You have to deploy MES. You have to add better quality data capture. You have to implement real-time visibility. You have to build governance around decision rights. You have to train your leaders and operators. None of those alone might count as transformative, but all of them together are required for a true transformation to happen. That's where the real trap is, not getting stuck in any individual one, or treating transformation like a single project instead of an orchestrated kind of system of projects.
Wow, that's a lot of work. But I want to go back and maybe dwell a little bit on the word modernize, right? Because to transform, we have to modernize that. And you spent quite a bit of time on that. So before we go into how companies complete the transformation phase and et cetera, can you talk to us a little bit, part of the manufacturing 4.0 framework, this word that you have used quite a bit and even now, what does modernize mean? What does that mean?
So this is, once again, it's not a precursor or requirement of transformation. So let's go through the definitions again. So modernization is about making current your technology. This is more of a reliability or stability play. This could be an outdated software or not up-to-date system that needs to be modernized or brought current to standards, regulations, performance in order to do other stuff. Optimization is getting the most out of what you currently have. Ideally a modernized system, but it may not be. And transformation is about changing the way that you work, the way that you capture value, the way that you create value, the way that your employees work. So you can transform without doing the others. You can do all three of them simultaneously, all independently. The main idea there is to think of them differently, because how you grade them is very different. A reliability project to upgrade to current standards versus, no, we want to completely change the way our company creates and captures value.
Are there things that you could look at? Okay, they have done these 4 things, so they have modernized. They have done these 3 or 4 other things, they have optimized, etc. Is there something like logical that we could look at and say they have gone through that phase?
Not as much, because Industry 4.0 is such a broad, expansive term that it so much depends on the company's current digital maturity, current architectures, current technology stacks, to decide what modernization may mean for them. Then you have to marry that with what the initiatives are for the companies to decide what may require modernization in order to do that. A lot of it's going to be at a foundational layer. So this could be around the data collection. This could be around the networking infrastructure. This could be just around some of the basic applications that may be old or outdated. There could be a whole bunch of things that need to be modernized depending on what initiative you're pursuing.
So when we look at the last stage, after you've gone through all of these hard work, like the transformation stage, are there any key indicators that you can look at and say, okay, it looks like they have transformed or not?
So it's a great question. And this is where the destination versus the journey debate really comes in. Because some people say transformation is a journey, and others say it has to have a destination. And I would argue, I think both are right, because there has to be an end in sight. Otherwise, nobody knows what success looks like. No one knows what they're building towards. And every project just becomes a random activity, potentially disguised as progress. So you need to have a way of saying, yes, this worked. Yes, we are operating differently now. And yes, we have transformed. Now, at the same time, though, transformation is never really done. No company stands still and survives. Markets change, technologies change, customer expectations change, and the business has to keep evolving with them. So even if you do set a vision and a destination for your transformation, things are going to change along the way as you get to that vision and even past that vision. So what does it look like to complete the transformation stage? It's not perfection, not we are done forever. It looks more like this. I would say the company has meaningfully changed how it operates, how it makes decisions, how it creates value. And the new way is real, the new way is repeatable, and the new way, whatever it is embedded. So it's no longer a side project or a special program that you're doing. And this is why transformation can be so hard to recognize in the moment, because it can be slow to realize. Outside of extreme situations like COVID, most companies don't do a rip everything out or reinvent themselves in one giant move because they feel they have to. They change while they're still running the business. They modernize some things. They optimize others. They gradually stack enough change that one day the company is genuinely operating at a different level. So the indicator is not just, did we finish the project? It's more like, did the business actually become different? Did new capabilities actually stick as an organization? Can we do things now that we realistically couldn't do before? That's where transformation is real. You have to make sure that the behavior has changed.
I have so many questions to ask you, but I want to go back to the first one again. So if the steps that you kind of laid out, this modernize, optimize, transform, are they sequential? Are they circular? Can I start any of those 3 steps as a point and then go around? Like, how do companies go through that journey?
So they're not meant to be sequential. Once again, they're meant to be a classification of a project type so that you approach that project or program the right way and don't confuse them. One of the things I see fail a lot is people say they're doing a digital transformation initiative, and then I've seen one company had 800 projects that were part of their digital transformation initiative, but all 800 got labeled as digital transformation. And that's where it can start to break down. So I came up with this as a way to help companies look at the projects that they have and go, you know what? Most of these aren't actually transformative. Collectively, they can transform the company, but each individual one may not be. A lot of what you're doing is upgrading existing systems, modernizing. Some of them are just improving the way that you're doing the thing that you're doing today. Not transformative, but there is a set improvement. Those are the best ones for ROI as an example, because you have a baseline that you can compare against. Transformative, by its very definition, is changing the way you do things. It's harder to measure ROI when you don't have a baseline because you're doing something different than what you did before. So when you look at a transformation program overall, like I said, you're going to have tens to hundreds of projects that flow in order. Some are running in parallel, some are dependent on each other. And you need to have a way of classifying them so that you're grading each one correctly while you're making sure that they all work together collectively to transform.
So let me use a high level example. Let's say I make 1 million widgets a day. It goes through a 10-step process and my kind of 9th step is broken, right? So should I focus on stepping back, like modernizing that step or optimizing that step, or I step back and transform? Because the main question is, when you are going through any of these phases, how do I decide, like you said, there are 800 projects. Do they just bubble up? Like, how do I go pick those, where to focus, how to focus, to take the framework so that I can logically make progression?
I wish there were a great answer for you. That's a lot of the struggle that companies have to figure out. Where I see some of the failure is the breakdown between the program overall, the initiative the company is doing, and then how they divide that out and assign the projects to people so that they can make sure that project did what it was supposed to do. And I see this often where the projects get broken up into be individually justifiable on their own. And that doesn't work for this type of transformation. Some of them will have that, others will not. For example, there's a lot of projects related to cleaning your data or network infrastructure or cybersecurity that shouldn't be graded the same way as increasing your OEE or your throughput by a certain percentage. They're very different projects. So usually you start with, what are you trying to accomplish as an organization? What transformations are needed? What areas need to be improved? We'll say optimized there. And which things need to be modernized in order to enable or allow those other things to occur? A lot of your modernization initiatives will support multiple optimization projects. If, for example, you need to modernize your ERP or your MES, you may be able to do 10, 15 secondary or second derivative projects as a result of that improve things or lead to transformations. Same thing with your network infrastructure or your data collection or your analytics. All those things could have a wide sweeping horizontal benefit for the company. But if you grade that network infrastructure project the same way is changing how your employees provide value, you're probably going to fail, which is why the statistics, in my opinion, are so high for digital transformation failures, is because they were grading them the wrong way.
So how do you know, going back to my example, there's a 10-step process, 7th step is broken, that they have truly optimized, not just automated a broken process? Are there a way to figure out what people are doing or even think it through before even they do it?
So I would say, like, a simple diagnostic test might be this. If you made the process run faster, but the outcome is still, I'll say, messy, inconsistent, or frustrating, whatever you were trying to potentially fix, you probably just automated an existing and probably broken process. Real optimization means the process got better, not just quicker. And a few ways to tell might be, are there fewer exceptions, workarounds, or escalations? Did handoffs get cleaner, or did they just speed up different parts? Are people relying less on heroics And tribal knowledge, did quality or predictability or decision making improve, not just cycle time? Another way to look at it is if volume doubled tomorrow, would the process still hold up? And I feel like that last one's kind of a big one because broken processes often look fine when automated kind of at a low scale, but then they crack as soon as you crank up the pressure on it. And so I usually say automation answers, can we do this with less manual effort? Optimization answers, should this process work this way at all? So the real diagnostic isn't did we automate the steps or did we optimize? It's more did we remove waste, improve logic, reduce variability, and make the process more scalable and resilient? Because if all you did was digitize a process, you didn't really optimize anything. You just made the dysfunction or the current way of doing it run on electricity rather than paper.
So I want to stay on this sort of journey and measuring, are we making progress or not? But I want to go back to the definition again, Jeff, a little bit. In our last discussion, you talked a lot about evolution of manufacturing 1.0, 3.0, 4.0, etc. What is the difference between manufacturing 4.0 and industry 4.0?
So, good question. Industry 4.0 is the nickname or the moniker given to the fourth industrial revolution. And historically, it kind of was widely advertised to the world in 2011 at Hanover Fair. And since then, it took hold all around the world. It became part of the German high-tech strategy. And at the time, it was more of a futuristic view of what manufacturing could and should look based off of what was possible at the time it was announced. Now, since then, the term has grown way bigger than that initial German high-tech strategy and vision for the future, and it more describes the era that we're living in. Most people would describe we're living in Industry 4.0 rather than a vision of what manufacturing could be in an optimal state. It's also expanded beyond manufacturing. Now if you look at the 4.0 nomenclature, even if you just go beyond production, there's maintenance 4.0, there is quality 4.0, there's safety 4.0, supply chain 4.0. Beyond that, there's government 4.0, education 4.0. The term is taken hold in a lot of different places. So manufacturing 4.0 kind of came out later as a way of re-narrowing it down to the function of manufacturing specifically. But once again, I describe it as this is a change in the way that value is captured, the way that value is created based off of all the new technologies being utilized collectively to completely change the way that the industry works.
In this journey, I don't know, people jump from 2.0 all the way to 4.0, or maybe they start at 2.5, try to get to 4.0. When you think companies where they have setbacks and they fail to get to an industry 4.0, are there common root causes that you see that are very generic in nature, or do they vary by segment or project by project?
So this, once again, depends on how you define Industry 4.0. Do you define it as a description of the time that we're living in or a future ideal state that you're working towards? Because I have a lot of companies that say, but we're not at Industry 3.0 yet, where I would argue back, is your company still surviving in 2026? Yes. Then you survived Industry 3.0. There was no epitome company that did everything possible in the era of Industry 3.0 to leverage every technology in the ideal way. It's just a description of the changes that occurred during that time period. Now, most people will answer this question that you have by pointing to visible problems. They may say companies get stuck in pilot purgatory, and that's one of the biggest reasons that Industry 4.0 isn't working if you view it as a description of a future ideal state. They'll say, pilot purgatory, we can't scale our use cases. The data foundation is a mess. All those will be things that people point to. And to be fair, those are absolutely real issues. If you look at Rockwell Automation's 2025 Smart Manufacturing Report, it says that 56% of manufacturers are still piloting and only 20% are using smart manufacturing technologies at scale. Manufacturing Leadership Council's 2024 AI survey found 39% are still in pilot mode at the plant floor level. And on the data side, MLC also reported that 70% of manufacturers still enter data manually, while 53% say they struggle with coordinating data across systems, and that's the top challenge. So yes, pilots do stall, and yes, data does break a lot of these efforts. But I think those are often symptoms people see, and it's not necessarily the true root cause. So there's actually one study that I reference all the time that came from a 2023 paper by Helion. I believe Ben Rubin and a few other people wrote it, which gives credibility because it's a peer-reviewed academic study, and it's open access, and it did more than just ask for surveys and opinions like some of the other reports do, where they just ask. The researchers, they use something called total interpretive structural modeling. And that's kind of a method designed to like map not just what are the barriers to Industry 4.0, but how they influence and impact each other. And their conclusion that they withdrew from this report was, I thought, pretty important. Lack of top management commitment was the strongest driving barrier to Industry 4.0, alongside inadequate funding and issues like IT infrastructure and cyber physical systems and communication models were more dependent barriers that were often downstream effects of leadership choices. And that matters because it tells us something pretty simple, but also pretty important. Most companies do not fail because they picked the wrong technology or buzzword trendy thing of the moment, or they bought the wrong software. They failed because the leadership is not aligned, the funding is not sustained, and the organization is not prepared to absorb the change that their initiative is trying to do. So in other words, the tech gets blamed for problems that were actually created upstream.
That is amazing. It makes a lot of sense. And so I'll come into the sort of the current moment where the same thing is getting discussed about Gen AI. But let's just take the word AI, because when I think about your words, modernize, optimize, transform, if there is one sector that has been using AI ML, is this industry or manufacturing sector, right? Whether it's logistics, whether it's vision, whatever it is. And you know this 10,000 times better I do. So can you talk to us a little bit before we get to the Gen AI context? Where has been AI ML in manufacturing, and where do you think it is today? And then we'll talk about Gen AI, because it's other part of AI that it's getting in.
So if we look at the broader AI, and I'm going to say industrial AI, so applicable to the actual processes within the four walls of the company, not things like ChatGPT is an example for workers. I would say the real ROI is coming from what I like to call the boring AI, not the flashy generative AI demos. And in IoT Analytics 2025 Industrial AI Market Report, automated optical inspection was the #1 industrial AI use case. I believe something around 11% of the market, while Gen AI use cases combined across everything were still under 5%. And what's interesting is in that report, they also say that machine vision has shown the fastest payback and the highest ROI among kind of all Industry 4.0 technologies. And the examples are pretty powerful in there. They had one company report 99.8% defect detection accuracy and 4 times throughput from AI inspection. I mean, Renault cited like 270 million euro in 1 year from AI-driven energy and maintenance savings. Even Georgia-Pacific reported hundreds of millions in annual value capture from AI tied specifically to operations. Now, other sources show the same pattern. If you look at World Economic Forum's Lighthouse initiative, so they recognize the top performing Industry 4.0 companies out there. In order to get that prestigious designation, you have to demonstrate that you made a notable improvement and you end up leading the world as being one of the best factories. That's why they call them lighthouses. You're shining the way for others. In their 2025 cohort, 77% of the top 5 use cases were enabled by analytical AI, and only 9%, I believe, were generative AI. And they said kind of those sites that reported this, they had an average of 53% boost in labor productivity. They had 26% reduction in conversion costs. They had a lot of value that they were able to extract from this. So while there's a lot of hype with the idea of generative AI, it's seeing its value more specifically in the interactions of people and frontline workers, using it as more of an assistant tool rather than actually being embedded into the processes itself. I'm going to call it tried and true machine learning is still dominating a lot of the value that people are getting. And they're not looking at it as an AI technology. They're looking at back to what are we trying to do as an organization? Increase throughput, reduce scrap, improve quality, improve safety, just back to the basics. And then how does ML or any type of AI help with that?
So let's stay at maybe a data level a little bit, because manufacturing, as you said, has been pushing the boundaries, whether it's in optics, whether it's in logistics, or the sensing, generating a lot of data over the years. So when you look at these modernize, optimize, transform, is there a way to look at the type of data and volume of data a company has to indicate where they are in that journey? Or is it not a correlation that you can lean on?
It's hard to say there, because one of the things that I think has made, I'm going to call it Industry 4.0, be a hard time to live in or a hard vision to achieve, is the proliferation and explosion of data. And this is mainly driven by IoT. The number of IoT connected devices is in the billions and billions. And so now we're having machines pump out a tremendous amount of data. And there's a lot of statistics out there showing that manufacturing is leading in data production, data generation. And so what I end up finding is most companies can't even take advantage of all the data they're currently producing, let alone strategically deciding to create new data for the purpose of some analytical benefit or real-time benefit. They're just trying to make sense of the data they have. So a lot of times people are spending money and effort connecting systems, contextualizing that data so that you can feed it into more advanced AI capabilities to leverage the existing data that you already have. And that's a monumentally difficult endeavor to take on, especially if you didn't have the right infrastructure foundation set to begin with.
You used a very important word earlier called orchestration. You said this whole manufacturing 4.0 has transformed into sort of industry 4.0 because you're not only trying to orchestrate the pieces within your organization, but you're trying to orchestrate your relationship with the customer, with the supplier, with the government, and with the community, right? There are different pieces that you're working on. So when we think about sort of an AI perspective, that is the word that's being spoken. And I did a podcast with Scott Brinker, who's called the father of MarTech, very similar your profile. He has been tracking MarTech companies. In 2011, he had 150 companies that he was tracking. Today, there are 15,000. And he's indicating that will possibly go into hundreds of thousands because each and every one of them solve niche problems. But one of the profound statement he made is that when we think about an application, we have database, application layer, business logic, API layer, and a presentation layer. That stack is collapsing rapidly. We're going to have a data layer, an orchestration layer with some sort of API orchestration with the supplier, with the customer, within the subsystems. And there's a presentation layer that'll be very likely strongly NLP based, right? That's a big vision, right? So when you look at the complexity of the industry that belong to, whether they're at 1.0 or 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, how are people thinking about this data? Because unless you have clean data, you cannot go from a workflow-based software tool that is embedded in your CRM or your supply chain to this fully orchestrated across subsystems with an agentic layer on top of it. Are people even there thinking about it? Are you seeing a smaller manufacturing client there trying to transform? Like, where is this happening?
It's a great question, and I wish I knew the answer, because not only let's just use AI alone, let alone all the other technologies out there. AI is so disruptive now that it makes it very difficult for even full-time knowledgeable people on it to know how to approach a strategy to best leverage it for their company. AI models are coming out all the time. New companies are coming out all the time. And AI is so expansive in what it can do that it's just difficult to stay on top of it, let alone anything else. So let's say you understand your company pretty well and you're looking for where to identify which types of AI technologies, which types of vendors, which types of software it's out there to fit it into your particular organization for a specific strategic benefit or transformational initiative that you want to do. While you're simultaneously doing that, the world itself of, I'm going to call it software, is dramatically changing because of AI itself. So not only are you trying to figure out how to use it, the vendors that make this stuff are dramatically changing. That's why you hear things like 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗀𝘃𝘀 being a new term that's coming up. You have the CEO of Microsoft talking about the future of SaaS completely changing as a result of AI. So now the way that you as a company create your architecture, your enterprise architecture, and work with vendors and try and plan out your tech stack is dramatically changing while you're trying to figure out how to integrate AI directly into your processes. Meaning, like, what does the AI do for your company? So those two things happening simultaneously, that's a challenge for any company to deal with. I think it's a little bit harder in manufacturing than some other industries because you not only have the digital layer up top at the enterprise space, but you have the physical layer of an actual factory floor, and you need to connect those two worlds together. Other industries don't have to deal with that. If you look at a function like marketing, it's a much smaller, simpler capability than integrating at an enterprise level across the digital and a physical world simultaneously.
So one word I want to go back under this frame of orchestration, maybe two words that you used earlier, IT and OT. First of all, I'd love to have you explain what those are. And then those data layers are very different because the systems that they use are very different. And then you put on top of that an agentic framework. So I want to take the next few minutes to delve into those three areas, but would you please take a minute and explain what is IT, what is OT, how do they come together, and what is the construct of data into those two domains today?
So IT is what most people think of as technology, and an average lay person would think of your cell phone, your laptop, your company computer, and the software that you use on your company computer. And it's a centralized group that was designed historically to figure out how to integrate technology into business processes to enable employees to do more and the functions to do more. It grew up that way. Simultaneously, OT, operational technology, grew up on the shop floor. How do you make physical processes work and run? And the term OT came out way later. And as that world start to slowly adopt, I'm going to call it IT-based technologies, things like, oh, we can now connect our machine to the internet to allow remote servicing and remote operations, or a machine to connect to another machine to talk together at a more advanced rate. Now you start to bleed into the IT world because you're dealing with access to an open market. You now have a whole different set of cybersecurity concerns. You have a whole different set of issues you're trying to deal with and a different set of knowledge you're trying to deal with, because you have OT people who grew up understanding control logic and how to manage machines, but not really computer science people, or I'm going to call it traditional IT, now needing to work with IT people that don't really understand how machines are controlled or what's important. I mean, one of the most important things for an IT team is confidentiality, making sure data doesn't leak. Versus for OT, one of the most important things is availability. You better not shut down my process because of a technology issue. Those two constraints right there force very different prioritization. And the companies that thrive in Industry 4.0 are the ones that start to make these systems and the people and the processes work together. The term for it's called IT-OT convergence. The companies that succeed are the ones that have really figured that out. AI has been a more recent driving factor to push that to happen, because if you don't have those teams on lockstep, your AI is always going to be limited on what it can do.
So I want to go back a little bit to the stack. If it's true that we're going away from a 5 stack to a 3 stack, and the composition of the tech stack is very different, database, orchestration, and presentation. When you look at these IT, OT, they have been all traditionally built, and maybe some of them even have COBOL in it. I don't know how old some of these databases go back. Who is thinking through this transformation? Like when I think about Jeff 10 years ago, right? You're at a CXO level. Who was your counterpart on the customer side that spoke to you? Who did speak to you 5 years ago? And who is speaking to you now saying, Jeff, I want to do Industry 4.0, but my board said I also got to sprinkle in some Gen AI into it. What does that mean? What do I like? Who is talking to you from the C-suite?
There is no great standardized answer on it. And this is where new technologies and the proliferation of new technologies has put a big burden on the CIO and their team to need to focus more on innovation, not just on the technology adoption and integration. So it depends on if your company has a chief innovation officer or a chief information officer. Some companies have chief digital officers or chief transformation officers that have different purposes within the organization. So it's going to depend on the maturity and the direction of the company. Traditionally, I worked mostly with the person in charge of operations. It could be a COO or it could be a vice president of operations or manufacturing, and whoever is usually in charge of the technology. Every company is different in how they were set up and how they work together. The best companies have this highly integrated. They might have a vice president of manufacturing IT that is part of the CIO's team, where their entire job is to make sure that everything is integrated within the OT world. You need to have people that can speak both languages, that can work together. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of friction, a lot of resistance, or just misunderstanding because of what's needed to pull this off. So unless you have a great structure already set up, it ends up becoming a pretty big committee that's needed in order to make the necessary moves to change the company.
We had a CTO from Cisco in one of our events in a panel, and he was talking about convergence of the CXO roles, simply because a lot of the workflows and techs are converging. And he said he sees a rise in chief AI officer. Is that something you're seeing with the C-suite that you're engaging with?
I recently wrote an article on this of do you need a chief AI officer or not? And the answer is not a simple yes or no. I think it depends on a variety of things. I do see it as a very useful functional lead that's either full-time, part-time, or temporary in order to get a handle around what to do right now. Longer term, I don't necessarily it's a fit for a lot of companies. The ones I think it is a fit for the company is if AI is part of your company's competitive advantage. Then it may be something that you built in as a full-time permanent role. For example, if you're a company that makes a technology product where you're using AI within your product and you're using it within your experience to your customers and you're using it internally to functionally enable your company, it may be worth having someone dedicated to it. If you're like most every other company, which is approaching it more along the lines of how do we make sure that we're not falling behind with AI? We need to make sure we're using AI. Then it may not be necessary as a role to have a dedicated chief AI officer just to figure out how to use AI technologies to make your company bigger, better, stronger, faster than what it was before. You can potentially outsource some of that expertise or make it temporary. I've seen some companies create a AI role only to disseminate it across the functions and remove their role as part of the creation of it. So their job is to build AI into every function rather than have it being standalone. But in that example of that company, AI was never their competitive advantage and it wasn't in their offering.
So as a follow-on question to that, so do you see the roll-up into a chief AI officer role with the multifunctional people, I'm assuming underneath them, whether it's VP of Ops or whatever those different roles are, or having a multifunction committee or steering team that you're talking about? Is it a reflection of people choose one versus the other, maybe in 2 dimension, where they are on this modernization, optimization, transformation, and how complex their ecosystem is? If they're upper right-hand quadrant, they need to be more rolling up because they're dealing with a lot more complexity, but they're also transformed, versus if there's someone. Do you see any correlation of such?
I haven't thought of it that way, but I will get back to answering the primary question. What is the purpose of AI in your organization? Are you purely looking at it as a tool that can be used like the internet to help you be better? Or are you planning on being an AI company? That's a very different strategic direction. So I view it as you can either be an AI company, which means what you make and produce is AI itself. Think OpenAI or Microsoft. They actually sell AI as a capability. Or you can be a company that includes AI in your offering. Maybe you sell software and you just embedded AI in it, or you have hardware and you embed AI in it. You're not an AI company, you're using AI within what you offer, or you make something that doesn't use AI. Let's say a food company, you're selling food. Those are three massively different approaches to the use of AI. So I get back to what's the point of AI for your organization? That will determine how centralized it becomes, how big the team, how big your investment is, and more the oversight and strategic direction of it. Otherwise, if you're just looking at it, like I said, is, hey, let's make sure every department is using it to help their department be better. You need to have someone maybe help corral it and make sure that people know how to use it and how to approach it in their standardization. That could be a much smaller function, smaller role, or outsourced because it may be more temporary than permanent.
So speaking of the C-suite, one of the roles that has emerged is chief partner officer. Some companies have it, some companies don't. But the primary focus for that role is managing the orchestration in their ecosystem within and outside the company, whether it's ISV, tech providers, regulations, governments, including lobbyists, right? You have to orchestrate them to make sure it's moving in the right direction. So when you think about in this part of this industry 4.0, what is the ecosystem management? Is it at a 1.0? Is it at a 2.0? Is it at a 4.0? What is that part?
So one thing I used to say when I worked back at Microsoft is one of the biggest companies in the world. And when I was approaching it there is to say, Microsoft had at the time something like 400,000 partners that they had. And in order to like pull off a full true digital transformation in the era of Industry 4.0, you had to use a large portion of them in order to pull it off. And what that really illustrates, even a big company like Microsoft, nowhere close to being able to do it on their own. There's no company that can do the full thing by themselves. You need a huge ecosystem in order to pull it off. And I would argue because of the proliferation of new technologies happening at an accelerated rate, new product categories that are coming out, and the speed of change, you even need new partners just to help you manage and understand all of them that are out there so that you're building this up in the right way, not just technologically, but from a partnership level. So you know which parts you want to do, which parts you want to buy, which parts you want to build, which parts you want to depend on others for. There is no simple answer because an ecosystem is now becoming a massive part of how companies create and capture value or how they work. Companies now are becoming more and more intertwined with other companies in how they work as part of their business strategy.
So speaking of the CXO suite, this is my last question. I know we went over it a little bit. The most important role is the CEO role. So when you look at the gamuts of industries and the CEOs that you work with, is there one question that you think that they really need to understand and then they don't?
So the one thing I would say I wish every manufacturer CEO truly understood is that Industry 4.0 is not about the technology. That's what gets the excitement. That's what is causing the discussion, is what technology will allow that company to do. But it's more about how the business runs and how decisions get made and how quickly the company can respond, adapt, and improve. And I think a lot of CEOs still see Industry 4.0 as a digital project, something for IT, maybe something for operations, depending on how you classify it, and something to delegate. But the companies that get the most out of it treat it as a leadership issue. They understand that this is about changing the way the organization works, not just layering new tools onto old habits. And that is where a lot of companies get stuck. They invest in systems, platforms, dashboards, and pilots, but they don't change ownership, processes, incentives, or the way teams work together. So they become more digital without becoming more meaningfully better. And if I could get every CEO to really believe one thing, it would be this. Industry 4.0 is not about modernizing the factory. It's about modernizing the company. Because in the end, this is not a technology race, it's a competitiveness race. And there's so much out there that can help you be more competitive.
With that amazing note, we're going to wrap this up today. Jeff, thank you for being here. I got to have you back next quarter. I know we only did one last year, because one other thing I want to talk about, especially in the CXO role, which you talked about a little bit last time, you write a lot, it's about the culture. Transformation must start with the cultural transformation. But that'll be our next episode. So we'll park that for now. But I sincerely thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.